do feel free to make comments, and we will look at that as we go. Question for Matt. Firstly, can you share your story with us? I mean, just from growing up in Malaysia and then moving to Australia to commencing your studies and career in healthcare.
Well, thanks, James. It's been quite a journey, I think, I think regardless of what country international students may be from, there's that shared sense of we're getting into this new culture, and certainly for me it was quite a transition. First of all, in terms of the education system, and Malaysia, like many countries, is very examination focused in its education system. And in Australia, I had to get used to a lot of research writing and, just self-directed learning, and of course, transitioning into doing everything 100% in English as well. So I think that's something that I really feel for students, that can be quite a struggle. I think the second part of your question with regard to healthcare, I think I always wanted to be in a healthcare profession. And I think the lovely thing about coming to Australia is the variety, the choice that's available. Just coming into the system and realizing that there were so many courses to choose from. If you want to be a healthcare professional, you can find the profession that suits your personality and suits your interest. So that would be, I think, my take on it.
Yeah, it must not be easy coming to Australia to study and then study in English and expected to have a full career in English. It's not easy. Jody, what can international students expect from studying healthcare or medicine in Australia, and how might this be different from what they expect in other countries?
Okay, so the course that we offer at Monash is really based within Victoria. So the first 2 years of the course are on campus at Clayton, and then the rest of the clinical years, year 3, year 4 and year 5 of the program, are based full-time in hospitals right throughout Victoria. So students can expect to spend at least some time in a rural area. So, for example, Bendigo, Mildura, Gippsland, Sale. So that's what's probably the most different in Australia is those 3 years of full-time in the hospital every day, seeing patients every day, and it's based within Victoria rather than just being in the one place the whole time. Students move around quite a bit.
And that's quite different to other countries, is it?
I think so, yes. Yeah.
That's interesting. So are they able to commence their studies in medicine offshore? I mean, obviously we're still in a really tricky situation for a lot of international students. And thank you again for all the international students that have talked to us here at Insider Guides over the past 18 months now, almost 18 months in regards to the issues they're facing with this pandemic. We feel for you. We want you back. Obviously, we're dealing with some tricky political situations and some safety concerns, but yeah, just in regards to medicine, Jody, are they able to commence their studies in medicine offshore, or what's the process for students unable to study?
So when the pandemic broke, we quickly flipped whatever we could deliver online to being online. So the way that our course is structured, year 1 and year 2 is really more campus-based. So students do basic sciences like pharmacology, microbiology, anatomy, clinical skills, and that has been able to be flipped to be delivered online. Fortunately, the Australian government is allowing students in their penultimate or final year to return to Australia because they will become part of Australia's medical workforce and will assist Australia in fighting the pandemic. So fortunately, all of our 4th and final year med students have been able to come back to Victoria to finish their course. And year 1, 2 and 3 are kind of studying a hybrid model on campus and online if they are in Australia. And the offshore students, we've put on additional tutors to support their learning while they're online. But we are hoping that, especially with Singapore, that a bubble arrangement will be created between Australia and Singapore that will allow our students to return to finish their course. And also, we do offer the same course at the campus in Sunway. So if any students are listening from Malaysia, the Sunway course is also an option.
We did have a question here from Divyangana Sharma. I'm a Diploma of Nursing student and interested in pursuing medicine in Australia after completing my Bachelor's of Nursing. What would be the way to do that?
Yeah, so you'd need to do some research on that one. Monash have a graduate entry program, and we have a pathway through our biomedicine degree. I'm not sure if you have some advice, Matt, but my advice would be to research perhaps some of the larger medical schools. There's larger medical schools in Sydney that may be able to accommodate you as a graduate entry student.
Cool. I'd second what Jody said. I think it's really about the units that you've studied in your previous degree and to what extent that will give you credit towards a graduate medical program. So yes, so do your research, as Jody has said.
Well, Matt, while I've got you, what was the process like for you when applying to study healthcare here in Australia? And how was the progression from undergraduate to postgraduate? You did that as well, which is pretty crazy.
Yes, well, I think it's always tricky for international students applying for healthcare because even getting to the interviews and things like that. Of course, this year it's been mostly online, but even having to, I remember flying into Australia to sit for the tests and things like that. So there is that sense sometimes that you're very far away, and you're trying to do things that domestic students are also doing, but everything's a little bit of a harder slog. So, and you've got time zone differences, you might be sitting tests in your home country at, crazy hours in the morning, that kind of thing. And I found it, I think also, the process was interesting in that, you're competing against domestic students in some cases who've gone through their school system, and you've gone through your own school system. And then you're sort of jumping in the pool together, if that makes sense. And of course, the entrance requirements are slightly different for international students as well. In terms of progression to postgraduate, I sort of took the research route, so that was through a PhD. And that's something I think that as you go through your undergrad degree in a health profession, you'll get a sense of whether you feel like you want to continue in that field of study. And I think what will happen is you'll make contacts and friends along the way. And certainly that transition for me was about one or two lecturers who I really enjoyed being in their classes and just feeling inspired by them and approaching them and having conversations about what post-grad study would be like. So I think it's a very organic thing, and you'll sort of find yourself pulled into post-grad study if that's your calling.
That's interesting. I was wondering, obviously doing that wouldn't have been an easy, I mean, for some people being confident enough to sort of seek out those opportunities further, that is something that some people have that innate ability to do. Do you have any advice for students who've arrived from another country, they're not quite sure about how they fit culturally, and give them that confidence to sort of pursue the opportunities during that progression?
Yeah, I totally get where you're coming from. It's quite it can be quite scary when you're sort of fresh off the plane, And I think in these COVID times as well, you might actually be spending, the first couple of years of your degree offshore. So you don't feel like a first year student, but then you're coming in at your third or fourth year, and expected to be this sort of seasoned, senior student, but really it's your first year actually being in Australia. So that's really hard. But I think what I would suggest is when you do get to Australia, I find that the biggest difference in the students I talk to is the extent to which they're talking to people outside of their own culture.
Right.
And I find that if you spend most of your time with a group of people from your country or from your culture or your language group, then that sort of transition or integration into Australia is much harder going. But if you talk to people from all walks of life, then you'd be surprised how quickly those friendships and relationships get established.
That's a truism, isn't it, across the whole international student experience, that the more you reach out of your comfort zone, the more you engage with locals and other professionals and other international students, but perhaps not those of your own nationality, and try to sort of get out and about. You do tend to notice that the students who do push themselves do end up gaining a little bit more of a foothold in their career. Jody, I'd like to bring you in here. What kinds of prerequisites do international students need to be aware of when applying to study healthcare or medicine in Australia? I mean, obviously, I guess it depends on the country you're coming from, but are there any particular requirements that are overlooked that a student can look at?
Yeah, so firstly, you need to be aware that getting into, especially medicine, is extremely competitive. So I always say to students, and I even say this to domestic students, don't put all of your eggs in one basket. So that means don't just apply for one course. And often courses will have more than one pathway to get in. So at Monash, we have the direct entry option for students coming straight from school, and then we have the direct entry option for students coming from biomedical science. So apply for more than one institution and more than one pathway. Also, again, you need to do your research because there will be additional tests that you'll need to do. So, for example, the ISAT test, you'll need to take that usually in the year before entry. So, for example, if you're looking at 2022 entry, you'd need to make sure that you're registered to take the ISAT test May or June the year before. So usually it's a combination of the ISAT test. You have to have the high English language capability, especially for medicine. The IELTS level is 7. So make sure you research that thoroughly and you've got the level required. And there's also a multiple mini interview or an MMI. So there's lots of information about that on our website, and all medical schools will have all of their entry requirements published. So an MMI is a multiple mini interview. Last year we did this online because of the pandemic, and so each station is like a different scenario, and you may not be aware of what's being assessed at each station, but they'll be looking at things like your communication skills, your empathy, reasoning, whether you are really cut out to engage with people on a day-to-day basis as part of being a health professional. So my advice is really make sure you do your research about the dates and don't miss the timelines, and make sure you apply for more than one institution and for more than one course.
Interesting. We do have a lot of questions here around, I mean, they're quite specific, so I'm not sure if I can answer these. One, Mai Pan Tan says, is the travel exemption, does that apply to international students who are in their final year of medicine course? Because I have friends who have applied for this travel exemption many times yet, and they did not get in. They're still stuck in Malaysia. We should probably touch on that. Obviously, it's a burning question for a lot of international students. Jody, do you have any advice? I mean, you don't have to speak on behalf of anyone for example, you don't have to speak on behalf of the government. But do you have any insights into what's going on with this travel ban?
Yeah, so the way that we got our students back is we had to provide letters from the university that stated they were in their final year, that they were part of the future workforce and they would be assisting to fight COVID. and that they had a confirmed clinical placement. So we also had to provide a separate letter from the clinic or the hospital that was hosting them to say that they were expected back and that they had compulsory placement arranged.
Okay, right. So, to answer your question, look, we don't know what will be approved, what will not be. We know there are thousands of international students who are still waiting to come back into Australia, and we are waiting for clarity on this border issue as well. We've been waiting for 18 months on basically and trying to work out what's going on here. So, apologies, but we can't answer that. As soon as we know some information, you'll hear about it on insiderguides.com.au. Well, we'll move on now because I would love to speak about some of the English requirements a little bit. Rebecca, obviously meeting certain English requirements is important, not only when applying for a student visa, but ensuring that you are able to study and eventually, if that is your goal, to practice medicine or healthcare in Australia. What are these English language requirements?
Thanks, James. And just before I answer that, I'd also say to the international students, Matthew probably is in a similar boat to me. We also can't leave Australia. So our families that are maybe mine, I've got a lot of family in the UK. Matthew, you probably still have family in Malaysia. We don't know when we're going to be able to see our family again either. So it's not perhaps as urgent as you'll want to come in to study or return to study, but we sort of have an understanding of what it feels like to not be able to travel or have that certainty. But to answer your question, so Jodie's already mentioned that universities and courses that you will take as a healthcare professional in a university will have their own English language entry requirements. But once you have your qualification, you've graduated, then the Australian Health Practitioner Regulation Agency, which we know as AHPRA, because the rest is a bit of a mouthful, they set specific language requirements, English language requirements, for registration onto that register. And it's really worth visiting their website. I think that's going to come through on the chat to understand what their requirements are for you personally. You can achieve those scores from a variety of English language tests, and OET is one of those. AHPRA require 4 B grades in OET, and that's in listening, reading, writing, and speaking.
Okay, and is that what makes the test different? I mean, that'll be obviously my main question is why should someone look at this over another English test?
Yeah, that's right. And I saw a question coming through from one of the participants, which was saying, should I take IELTS? I've heard of OET, I've heard of PTE. Mm-hmm. These are all high stakes language tests, but the difference is that OET is the only one that tests you using healthcare as the topic. And so for many students, this is the moment where it's like a light bulb goes on as I'm talking, because they're aware of maybe IELTS or PTE, but they just didn't know that there was an option for them as a healthcare professional. And it means that everything you're tested on, as I said, has a healthcare topic, but also more specifically for writing and speaking. If you're a doctor, you're going to write and speak about patients, which are typical to your work as a doctor. And the same if you're a nurse or a dentist or a physio, because OET has 12 versions covering these broad healthcare specialisms. So compared to other tests you may have heard of or taken, OET respects the training and experience you've already gained and tests you using language you would use every day in your work as a healthcare professional, meaning any preparation that you do for OET is going to be absolutely applicable to you once you start your career in Australia.
We have a question here from Alice May. I have studied for 5 years in Australia. Am I still required to do an English test for nursing?
I believe you might be. It will depend on perhaps the course that you did and whether you satisfied language requirements to take that course. But Jodie or Matthew may have more of an answer on that.
Matthew?
Yeah.
Jodie?
The question that does that Why?
The question was whether or not we, if you had studied nursing for 5 years, if you had studied in Australia for 5 years, do you then need to take another English test to be able to study nursing?
Oh, right. So I believe that you would have to look at the AFRA website on the specific number of years. So that would be
Yep. Cool. We're just losing you on the microphone there, Matt, but all good. We'll just move on now. So, Rebecca, how can international students prepare themselves to ensure that they are getting the English test score that they need? I mean, whether it's for example, for the OET.
Yeah, that's right. So the first thing you really need to do is, as Jodie's also mentioned, you need to do a little bit of research, but rather than researching what course you should take, you need to research what your current level of English is. And this has just become a whole lot easier, actually, because OET has launched a test with this purpose in mind. So it's called OET Pulse. And like the OET test, this placement test uses healthcare topics to test your reading, listening, and language knowledge skills, and will accurately provide you at the end of this short test with your current language level. And once you know that, you then know how close you are to the test scores that you need, whether you need to enroll in some general English classes to improve your overall language level, or that you're ready to start preparing right now for OET because you already have the language level you need. And I think just popping up on the screen now, we have a special offer for OET Pulse for the participants in this session today. We're offering it at 50% discount, and there's more information to find out about that offer on your screen at the moment.
All right, well, let's get down to the nitty-gritty of actually taking an English test like this. What would be your advice for students to actually undertake this test?
Okay, so I've got 2 pieces of advice I'd like to share. So, of course, taking any type of high-stakes test, which OET is, has the opportunity to open doors and be really life-changing, and that's going to make you feel nervous. But knowing that OET uses context and topics you're familiar with should help you feel reassured. So for the speaking test, for example, you would complete 2 role plays with a person who takes the role of your patient or their relative. And so a piece of advice is, imagine this is a real patient and speak to them in a way that you would if you were working. And this will help you relax, feel more confident, perhaps even forget that you're being tested. And the second piece of advice is remember this is a test of your English, not your medical knowledge. So we have lots of healthcare students in Australia, but also around the world, who take OET before they graduate from their bachelor or master's course because they need and they know that they're going to need this result for registration. And they worry that maybe they don't have enough accurate medical knowledge for some of the tasks. But for OET purposes, that won't matter. The focus is how you communicate in English. And you're not actually penalised for any inaccuracies in your medical knowledge for OET.
Interesting. Yeah, we are getting a lot of questions here around whether or not I need to take a test or not. For example, we have a question here. I've studied I'm coming from the UK. It's my first language. Do I need to take an English test to study any medical related fields in Australia? Jodie, do you have any insights into that?
Sorry,
if English is your first
question?
Yeah, no worries. If we had a question here asking if you come from an English speaking background, like if for example, if you come from the UK, do you still need to do an English test if you're going to study any sort of medical field in Australia?
I'm pretty sure if you can show that your secondary school was conducted fully in English, that you would get an exemption. Right. But please have a double check of the website of the institution you're applying to.
No problem at all. And we had someone else asking about Singapore as well. Would English?
So that would be the same. If the institution's language of instruction is in English, you can get an exemption.
Interesting. Right, so there are some other resources and suggestions where students can get more information. We'll put that in the link now. Did you have anything else, Rebecca, that you wanted to mention to everyone here today about any suggestions that they should look at when looking into this English test component?
Yeah, absolutely. We've got a lot of resources designed to help you get ready to take OET. And I think our website has already been shared, but the best place to start on the website is our Prepare page, simple as it sounds. And that includes lots of free, high quality practice resources. But also many candidates enjoy interacting with us, but also other candidates on our social media channels. You can find us at Official OET on both YouTube, Facebook, and Instagram. And that's a great way to start learning a bit more about the opportunities OET can offer and getting some inspiration. We're currently running a very popular hero campaign. So we found 5 heroes from different parts of the world who are all working to use OET to work either in Australia or the UK. It's very inspiring, and we're following their journey to that end goal. So social media is also a really good way to interact with us.
Great. Well, I'd like to talk now a little bit about the healthcare industry and some of the jobs around it. Matt, I mean, you obviously just made a decision to pursue psychology. I'd love to get you an idea of if an international student is eager to study healthcare, but isn't sure what kind of job or role is perfect for them. What can they do to ensure they make the right choice?
Well, that's a really interesting question. My sort of take on it would be to get a sense of what a typical day in that profession would be like. So it's really about it's sometimes the idea of being a doctor or a nurse can be very different from the reality of what a real day on the wards is like, or even what a day as a psychologist is like. So I think really, if at all possible, spending a day with someone who is working in that field, or just talking to them and asking them, what was it like to spend 4 or 5 years in that course? And what's it like for you now, starting to work in that field? What's a typical day for you like? What's your worst day like? What's your best day like? Because it's really admirable, all the people in the webinar now. It's really admirable that you want to be in a health profession, because it means you have a desire to help people. But you have to think about what's the best way to channel that empathy. Would I be better off talking to people? Is counseling my strength? Is a more medical field my strength? Is a more physical field like physio or OT my strength? So yeah, just getting those lived experiences and talking to people who are already in those jobs.
Okay. I mean, yeah, I think I have to agree with that. The idea of reaching out to a professional already in the field is the best way that I've found to actually get quite a good answer as to what it's like. It certainly is. We are getting a lot of questions, and I do apologize for those that are asking questions that are very specific. Obviously, there's a lot of people joining this webinar today that are at different stages of their medical journey. Some of them are just starting, some of them have been here a few years and looking to take the next step. We will endeavor to get to a Q&A soon, but I wanted to outline that some of these things we will not be able to answer, and we will do our best to answer some of them. Jody, the healthcare and social assistance industry is the largest employing industry in Australia. What kind of jobs in healthcare are most in demand in Australia?
Yeah, look, nursing is probably the most in demand career in Australia, and so is medicine. So at the moment, there's a body in Victoria that manages the internship jobs for medical students called the PMCV, the Postgraduate Medical Council of Victoria. So all of our graduates go into a pool for an intern position. So just to let you know, the applicants are ranked. So domestic students from Victoria are ranked number 1, domestic students from interstate are ranked number 2, and then international students are ranked number 3. But that being said, we cap the number of graduates according to the number of jobs available in Victoria. So last year we graduated around 500 doctors, and they were all employed as interns. Anyone who wanted an internship in Victoria got a job. But I can say that these degrees open up a whole wide range of opportunities for further study, for research, for PhDs, for employment overseas, in anywhere in the world, really. Having a degree in the health industry is really well recognised all around the world.
Yeah, we did have a question here from Alyssa Carmen Tan Sim. Is it possible to do a residency and internship in Australia? It sounds like it is, but we'd love to hear a little bit more about that process. Jodie, do you have any insights on that?
That's managed by an external body outside the university. So, yeah, that's something I'm involved in.
No worries. Yeah, but it is possible. Yeah.
It's possible,
cool.
yeah.
Yeah, okay, cool. Awesome. Interesting. So, all right, we'll move on a little bit. Jodie, Rebecca, how important, let's talk about communication here. How important is communication and the skills required to communicate well in healthcare, and why are they important?
So I'm not a healthcare professional, but I obviously work in a language test that is testing healthcare professionals. So I've come to learn a lot about this in my time teaching and working for OET. And good communication skills in healthcare are absolutely critical. And I expect that any of the participants joining this session already know that, because it doesn't matter whether you're working in English at the moment or in another language. When you're communicating with a patient about patient care or with a colleague about patient care, it has to be clear and accurate, or things can go wrong, and sometimes they can go badly wrong. And that's why the Australian government has English language standards. They're designed to protect both healthcare professionals and patients, because everyone wants patients to have high quality care, which is safe. And a test like OET gives you the confidence that you have the proficiency in English to do this. And regulators have the confidence that your OET results demonstrate you can provide the high level care they require, and can do that in a way that patients will find easy to understand.
We did have a question here from Shakilan Prakash. I am an international student doing my foundation year at Monash College, and I'm keen to enroll into Monash Medicine. Do I need to take the IELTS or the OET?
Jodie.
It's probably best to check our website and make sure that you have met those entry requirements.
No worries at all. Yes, it's it sounds like there's a lot of steps to understand. So we do encourage you to go check with the individual universities and really do your research. Obviously, this is a top level insight into the world of medicine, but as you can hear, it's a little. We're just scraping the surface, and we'll do our best to dig a bit deeper. Matt, what
I
are
think
the
it's
other...
worth pointing out, sorry, James, if I could just touch in there as well. OET, as I've mentioned now a few times, covers a test in healthcare knowledge. So if you're a student coming into a course of study in healthcare, having never studied healthcare before, OET isn't going to be the appropriate option for you at that point, because you would need some healthcare knowledge to be able to complete the test. You need to be familiar with patient care and vital sign readings and that sort of thing. And that's why universities sometimes use a different test for entry into their courses. But if you're an international student who's perhaps already qualified, as a nurse or a doctor in your own country and is now entering a master's course, for example, in Australia, then many Australian universities accept OET results from those kinds of students, because obviously then it's a really appropriate test. You've already learnt sufficient healthcare knowledge. And even, as I mentioned earlier, if you're an undergraduate student but nearing the end of your studies in Australia, for leaving your course to graduate and go on to registration again, OET is absolutely the most sensible test for you as a healthcare professional.
That's interesting. Matt, I'm interested to hear from you as well. What other skills and attributes do you feel are important for international students seeking to study and practice healthcare or medicine in Australia?
Well, in my own experience,
Still frozen.
I think that. Oh, am I frozen?
It's all good. Keep going. We can hear you perfectly, actually.
Okay, so I'll just keep going. So in my own experience, I've actually found that one of the most important but often overlooked things is an understanding of the practical side of the healthcare system. So by that I mean, how Medicare works, how ARFA registration works, how private insurance and the NDIS work, and I know they're really sort of boring technical topics, but really this is the way, if you are going to forge a career as a healthcare professional in Australia, this is your, bread and butter. This is how you're going to earn your salary. So it's really important to have at least a starting to have an understanding of that before. And that's going to, inform as well your choice of profession, your choice of qualification. Different degrees lead to different possibilities in terms of work. So I think just understanding how the system works on a practical level.
Yeah, that's really good advice, and it would certainly help you understand. I mean, you're not going to be employable unless you know how the system works. Anyway, we have we're talking about employability. I'd like to ask you, Matthew, this one: will employability chances be harder for offshore workers in post-COVID situations?
So it depends, I guess. I think what I've found from talking to students throughout the pandemic is that what it's done is made a lot of people reevaluate their life plans. It's a hard thing to have to deal with, but a lot of people have had to make a decision about, will I still be able to come to Australia? Do I want to move to Australia? That sort of thing. So it's a lot of long-term planning involved, and I think it's very specific, not only to your profession, but what you feel your life goals are. Like what do you see as important for yourself and your family and your future, 5 years in the future, 10 years in the future? So it's a really hard question, I'm afraid, to give like a general answer to, because, what's going to be good for one person might not be good for another person. So I'd say, have a really good think about how it all goes.
No worries. Okay. I had a question here, Jody. Is a gap year an issue to get an admission?
Not at all, no.
Okay, that's good. We had another question here. I understand that there are two options when applying for graduate medicine in Australia, which is individual applications or via an education agent. I was wondering, what is the process for enlisting the help of an education agent for graduate medicine applications? Jody, are you the best person to look after that one?
Look, yeah, we have both options coming in. Look, the best advice is probably to do your own research. I think a lot of international students find using an agent very helpful, but it's also just as good to apply directly to the university, as long as you make sure that you are on top of when to apply and what the entry requirements are.
That takes me into a question from Amy. Can a student apply for a conditional offer if they don't have like an IELTS test or something like that, or for any specific requirements from a university, can they still apply and get a conditional offer?
That would vary depending on the university that you're applying to.
Right.
I know that we have had students who have been made a conditional offer and then have had to go away and upskill their English language for a couple of years, actually, and then eventually they were made admission. So that's variable. But just, again, you have to check the website of each institution you're applying
Sure.
to. Yeah.
No problem at all. We did have one. I'm a Diploma of Nursing student and interested in pursuing medicine in Australia after completing my Bachelor of Nursing. What would be the best way to do that? Matt, do you want to take that one?
Yeah, I think just going on from the earlier question, which was similar, really looking at what you've studied right down to the unit level, and looking at what credit you've accumulated. And as Jody mentioned, every institution will have slightly different requirements. So you might find that, what your prior study counts for a different amount at different universities in Australia. So, and really looking at your range of options, as Jody was saying, not putting all your eggs in one basket, and really recognizing that there are so many institutions in Australia, so many states and territories, and finding what will suit your life plans the best, I think.
Obviously, cost is a big one as well. We've got a question here from Yana Lara, who's currently studying. I'm a third-year medical student in the Philippines, and I was wondering if I could get an estimate of my expenses with the whole process of practicing residency in Australia. I'm not expecting a very detailed answer here, but Jody, I guess that's an interesting one. Obviously, it's expensive.
Yeah, I can say that we have a fantastic medical student organisation called MUMUS. So if you search up MUMUS, mumus.org, and get in touch with a medical student here in Australia, I'm sure they'd be happy to give you an estimate of how much they spend on the living expenses.
Yeah, and if you're looking at trying to save money in Australia, head to insiderguides.com.au. We have a cost of living calculator where your students can work out how much their life will cost based on a series of assumptions. We had a question here as well, one for you, Rebecca. When am I supposed to take the OET test? Is it during my last year of medicine?
Yeah, we find a lot of candidates do take it during their final year because obviously once they have graduated, then there are some other steps they need to do, but they start thinking about registration. And for AHPRA's purposes, OET results are valid for 2 years. So a lot of them see that as a good time while they're already studying, getting ready for exams in that sort of mode to just do one more test, particularly because it is so healthcare related. And then they have that 2-year window to finalise everything else, get their application in and registration done.
Okay, so they've got about 2 years.
Yeah, that's right. And that's not a requirement OET sets, but it's one that AHPRA has for the validity of those results. So they don't have to take it during that final year. They can wait until after graduation. It depends how quickly they want to start on that registration process with AHPRA.
Right, okay. We had a question here. I mean, one for you, Jody. We talked about quotas for international students before. I guess in terms of the amount of international students. Can we just clarify that? We had a question from Nurul Fazlin. He just wanted to understand the quotas on international students if they were to get a job in Australia in healthcare. Just a little bit more clarity on that. That's what we're after.
Yeah, so it's not so much that there's a limit to how many international students can get a job, it's the ranking system. So international students are ranked 3rd in Victoria. However, each state has their own system for graduate medical students getting jobs. So you'll need to check again with the regulations with each state. So yeah, there's currently no cap on the number of jobs available for international students, but it is a competitive process.
Absolutely. Just getting into medicine to begin with is difficult and competitive in that stage as well. We have a question here from David Lauchia. What are the common mistakes that offshore applicants, i.e. overseas applicants, should avoid when applying for a nursing job in Australia? Matt, do you want to take that one?
So I guess I think the question is probably referring to trying to apply for a job while you're offshore. Would that be right? So I think
What
well,
are the common mistakes yes, you're probably right. Yeah.
yeah, so the difficulties in applying when you are sort of physically offshore, I guess, is what the question is asking. I think in terms of common mistakes, it's really I think it's really worth getting some practice in your interview skills, if that makes sense. So there is there is a way to interview well when you're going for a job or an internship position, just generally in healthcare, and that involves English skills. That involves there's looking at your suitability in terms of your personality, your empathy, things like that. They're looking at how creatively you answer the questions. So I think really, it's not all about the knowledge that you have in that field, if that makes sense. It's not all about your medical knowledge necessarily, but it's about how you interview and how you come across in those selection processes.
Which is made increasingly difficult over Zoom and these sorts of things. So
Yes,
not an easy time, but yes. We did have a question, and something that has come up before at Insider Guides is trying to understand how to sort of match qualifications. And I think, Jody, you might be the best person to answer this. Satyam has asked, how do you become a consultant urologist in Australia? And we'll just use that for example. With Indian qualifications, if one is trained in India, as a neurologist or urologist, sorry.
Okay, so in Australia, you do the university part of your study, which at Monash is at 5 years. It's 5 years. Then after that, you get a job as an intern. So when you get a job as an intern, you are being paid, but you still are a doctor in training. So after that, you become a registrar and a consultant, and then you take your exams in your chosen field or specialisation, and then you would become a urologist. So altogether, it takes around 10 years before you are a specialist doctor. The first 5 years is at university, and the following years are in the hospital system, and you're being paid, but you're still under supervision and you're still a doctor in training.
That's interesting. Yeah, I mean, it just seems like a long time, but it is a long time to become a professional in such a sophisticated field. We had one here, which sort of lends me to a question from Pasakon Sudavasipatha. I'm sorry, that name pronunciation. I did some research on how to become a doctor in Australia. Upon graduating, you seemingly follow the pathway of internship, resident, unaccredited and accredited registrar, fellow, and eventually consultant. Do we need to complete the whole thing to be able to practice medicine in Australia, or what is the least requirement? Interesting.
Yeah, so that follows on from the previous question. So when you're an intern, you're being paid and you're employed as a doctor. You are a doctor by that stage, but you're still under supervision and you're still continuing your training. So yes, you need to do the whole thing before you can open up your own clinic and practice independently without that supervision. The requirements in Australia are very strict, but if you train as a medical
and you need to do it all in Australia.
In Australia, you can practice medicine anywhere in the world. It's a golden ticket to work anywhere in the world, really.
Sure. Wow, there you go. On that note, I'd like to thank you all so much for your questions, and I'd really like to thank the panelists as well. We are running out of time here. I would just want to thank OET for sponsoring this webinar. Thank you so much, Jody, because Rebecca Bush and Dr. Matthew Tong. My name is James Martin. I'm the Managing Director here at Insider Guides. We create a huge amount of online content for international students. Please, this has been a really fascinating chat. I really enjoyed this, and I hope you all have a fantastic career in medicine, and take the OET test and go to Monash. It sounds like they're both extremely knowledgeable and very good tests. Cool. All right. Well, thank you so much, guys. We'll leave it there, and yeah, you'll all get an email after this with some feedback. We would love to get your feedback. We can make these better over time. Did anyone have any else they wanted to share before we leave?
No, thanks, James. It's been really interesting to be part of the panel. I've learned a lot as well.
Thank you.
Thanks, James, for hosting.
Yeah, thanks everyone.
Yeah,
Bye.
I think there's a lot of people just stuck on like a little bit of an issue. So I'm glad we were able to overcome them as throughout this webinar.
Yeah,
it's good. Okay, guys, have a good afternoon and night or morning or after wherever you are in the world. Thanks again. See ya. Bye.
Bye. Thank you. Oh, bye, Jody.
Bye, man. See ya.
Thanks. See you.